Ant-Man, like all comic book movies, is packed with Easter eggs and references that nod towards all sorts of things in and around the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So let's get through as many as we can, bearing in mind that there will be spoilers for this film, as well as other films in the MCU. Plus also spoilers for the film The Empire Strikes Back. So yeah, spoiler alert for that movie from 1980, where Han Solo's frozen and Darth Vader allows creatures to wear no shoes on his Star Destroyer. Put some bloody shoes on, Bosk, for God's sake. This isn't your weird lizard homeworld. Let's kick things off with Ant-Man himself. Now in the comics, Hank Pym has had many heroic alter egos, but two of them referenced in the movie were Yellow Jacket, the same name as Darren Cross's villainous alter ego, and Giant Man. Although Giant Man isn't specifically mentioned, Pym particles are used to expand things left, right, and center, possibly hinting towards the future of Ant-Man. Other characters from the Ant-Man universe are also touched upon. Janet Van Dyne as the original Wasp, whose mantle is going to be taken up by her daughter Hope, who in the comics is the villainous character, the Red Queen. Interestingly, Hope's haircut is also similar to that of her mother's from the comics. You know what, that's not that interesting. I shouldn't have said interesting. Scott Lang's daughter Cassie also eventually takes on a superhero role. She's been referred to as a few names, including Ant-Girl. Taking this in a different direction, also in the comics, overexposure to Pym particles is seen to take a toll on a person's mind, which can lead to irrational and violent outbursts. This was referred to and shown in the movie. Michael Douglas's Hank Pym wasn't willing to don the suit again because of the long-term effects he'd already experienced, and Darren Cross had completely lost his mind due to them. Shrinking lambs like nobody's business. Scott Lang's favorite ant, Antony, is initially called Ant 427, a nod to Marvel Premiere 47 and Tales to Astonish 27, the initial appearance of the first two Ant-Men. The words Tales to Astonish are actually spoken by Darren Cross when he refers to Hank Pym's rumoured past activities, which we do briefly see a few times. Most noticeably at the beginning of the film, with the inclusion of the Triskelion, as seen in The Winter Soldier, but in its infancy. In there we get cameos from veteran S.H.I.E.L.D. agents Peggy Carter, Howard Stark, and Mitch Carson. Eric O'Grady, the third Ant-Man, is not seen but hinted at with the inclusion of Mitch Carson, who also happens to be a Hydra agent, which means they weren't as wiped out as the Avengers thought. Anyways, in Eric O'Grady's story, The Irredeemable Ant-Man, it was Carson who was to have the Ant-Man suit passed along to him before it was stolen. The line, "Redeem yourself," is also uttered, possibly referring to that same story, and the fact that the Yellow Jacket has multiple appendages and the ability to fly, like that particular suit, could also be a nod towards it. A couple of other scenes take cues from existing comics, including Marvel Presents number 11, where Ant-Man is washed down a sink and has to contend with a rat, similar to Scott Lang's first exposure to Pym particles. Also in the comics, Ant-Man has a tendency to shrink items such as weapons and scientific instruments to use when need be, like how he keeps a tank on a keychain and other miniaturized items around his house. That's actually the same tank we see in one of Hank Pym's earlier missions. Also, if you do want to know more about the movie version of both Hank Pym and Scott Lang, there's a prequel comic and viral video that go into a fair bit of detail.
I reported on Tony Stark in Gulmira, and believe me, you're no Tony Stark.
Thank God.
Stan Lee also gets his obligatory cameo as a bartender towards the end of the film. The Milgram Hotel is a nod to comic book writer, artist, and editor Frank Milgram, and when working at Baskin-Robbins, Scott Lang uses the name Jack, potentially a nod to Marvel comic book legend Jack Kirby. Also, Garrett Morris, who played Ant-Man in an old SNL skit, appears as the driver of the car, the roof of which Scott Lang lands on when he's trying to get a handle on the suit. With Marvel falling under the Disney banner, it's natural that other Disney properties would be referenced. The tune It's a Small World is whistled by Michael Pena's character. There's a stuffed flounder toy seen in Cassie's room, and like all the movies in Marvel's Phase 2, somebody loses an arm as a nod to The Empire Strikes Back. This time being Darren Cross when he's defeated. Hang on a sec, I just want to... There we go. Yep, that was really bugging me. That's bloody basic hygiene, man. Also, the original director Edgar Wright's test footage is mostly recreated in one of the fight scenes. And although this isn't a Disney character, we see Thomas the Tank Engine in a spectacular crash, similar to the many times he's crashed in real life. Sorry, not like real life. I mean, he's a talking train, and that's not realistic. His mouth doesn't even move.
Cinders and ashes, said Thomas. I'm stuck.
And he was.
Lastly, nods to the other Marvel movies are plentiful. We see Pingo Dos, the Marvel brand soda that was in The Incredible Hulk. San Quentin Prison, where Scott Lang is at the beginning, also had the Punisher spend some time there for murdering Spider-Man, but we'll get to him in a bit. Hank Pym mentions how the Avengers are probably busy dropping cities in reference to Age of Ultron, as is a newspaper article seen with the headline, "Who's to blame for Sokovia?" The Falcon also appears in the Avengers' new facility. He even says to Scott Lang how he relates to him having to steal a piece of tech to save the world. Because in The Winter Soldier, he assists Steve Rogers by reacquiring a set of wings. Speaking of The Winter Soldier, the post-credits scene features a captured Bucky Barnes, in addition to Captain America and the Falcon. This scene is actually lifted directly from the upcoming Civil War. Also, the Ten Rings, the organization run by the Mandarin, the real Mandarin, who we do know exists from the Marvel one-shot All Hail the King. That symbol is tattooed on one of the guys' necks who wants to purchase the Pym particle technology from Darren Cross. The Marvel character known as Eternity, who's like the embodiment of time and every living being or something. I don't know, it's complicated. And comics are nonsense. Well, he's potentially briefly seen in the Microverse in the film renamed The Quantum Realm as a shadowy figure. Also, this is where the word eternity, as spoken by Hank Pym, echoes again and again in Scott Lang's head. Unless that refers to a different immortal being called the Eternity, who's also as old as the universe itself and is the embodiment of all living things and can inhabit the Microverse. Comics are ridiculous. Finally, Spider-Man is referenced towards the end of the film, where it said the Avengers have guys who can jump, swing, and climb up walls. Apparently this scene was written well before the Sony Marvel Spider-Man deal went through, though I'd imagine that the sharing of the Spider-Man character was a conversation that stretched years back. Almost as if Sony knew that they were going to keep making subpar Spider-Man movies until everybody demanded that they stop. Thanks everyone. Now if you liked this, maybe you'll be interested in all the other Easter egg videos that are on my channel that cover a variety of films, or even a different set of videos that look at things you may have missed from all the latest trailers. Also have a podcast called The Weekly Planet that looks at movies and TV shows and comics and comes courtesy of the terrific comicbookmovie.com. All the playlists for those things mentioned will be linked below and at the end of this video. What was your favorite Easter egg or reference from Ant-Man? Was it some Adam Ant on the soundtrack? Or the title of track number 2, Honey, I Shrunk Myself? Of course, finding these things in movies is an ongoing process. So if you've caught anything that I haven't, please feel free to mention them in the comments below. Alright, thanks everyone. Take care.